Prelude. Everyone has their own special place, a place somewhere on earth that is theirs and theirs alone, a magical place wherein dwell those important to them, those they love the most. One such special place was a small valley amidst the sand dunes of the Sahara Desert, a magical setting out of bounds to anyone other than the person who created it, a little prince from an asteroid, a rose and a fox. Another special place was the delightful riverbank shimmering with the silvery undersides of willow leaves where, far from the dusty world of humans, a small water rat had made his spotless home and a fattish toad had his grand hall, and where, one summer's night just before dawn, the water rat and his friend the mole heard the clear strains of a piper and found themselves drawn along the river by the beauty of the music, ultimately to encounter the luminous figure of Pan in the hush of daybreak. My special place is a house built in the shade of a large zelkova tree and home to a big boy, a younger boy, and a very small girl of about 5 or 6. The garden is a riot of fruit trees, apricots and chestnuts and figs and cherries. On clear summer days when the afternoon sun floods the lawn with light, the children take out the hosepipe sprinkler to spray the lawn and frolic about noisily under the shower of water. The boys are wearing black shorts and the girl a yellow swimsuit her mother made for her. Small rainbows dance over the green turf as the water sprays all around. My younger self slips out of the house next door and sneaks into the garden. The older middle school boy and the little girl wave to me in welcome, but the more reserved younger boy scowls. I suck in my breath and charge into the spray of water. Oh, the wonder of a cold shower under the dazzling sun on a hot day. Intoxicated by summer, we roll around the lawn like young braves. The fragrance of wet grass, the sweet smell of damp earth. Finally, the smaller boy pounces on me like a young bear, and we start wrestling with all our might. The little girl's eyes glitter merrily as an imp's as she watches us, her happy laugh ringing high up in the branches of the big tree. After a while, the sky darkens and a real afternoon shower comes along, putting an end to our play. A loud clap of thunder rumbles through the sky, and the little girl and her 2 elder brothers vanish into the darkness. And so does my younger self. It is always midsummer in my special place. At times, little scamp that I am up in the white fig tree in the girls' garden. Playing the part of a robber, I clamber over our cypress hedge, climb the tree and move from one fruit to the next, milky white sap seeping from the stalks as I pick them, devouring them greedily as I go. The air is filled with the fragrance of the fig leaves. The little girl comes out of her quaint Western-style house. Oh no! I hide my face under the big leaves, but she makes a beeline for the tree and politely calls up, "Pick one for me too." The fearless robber is instantly transformed into an angel descended from heaven to pick a figure. "Thank you," she says gratefully and, skipping over the short shadows, goes back into the house. My mind full of the girl with a slim neck and beads of sweat on her nose, I sit on my fig branch drawing a castle in the blue sky, a daydream castle where one day the girl and I will live together. As the big summer thunderclouds amass and begin to tower high, so too my castle spreads throughout the boundless blue sky. In my own special place there is no little prince from a distant star, nor a pleasant riverbank from where sound the clear strains of Pan's pipes. My special place is the house in Tokyo where I was born and grew up, which was destroyed in an air raid during the war. I can still recall how, when I joined the mass evacuation of primary school children leaving for the countryside, I kept looking back at it longingly over my shoulder as I was led away. No trace remains of that house now, nor of the house in the shade of the big zelkova tree next door. And I'll probably never again get to meet that little imp of a girl who lived there. Or so I believed for over 10 years, until one day I ran into an old friend by chance on the train and he happened to mention her to me. "She still remembers you, you know." She said she sometimes wishes she could meet up with that boy next door who is so good at the high bar. She sounded really quite wistful. I was speechless. Paying me no heed, my friend went on. It really took me back, talking about our childhood days with her. Although she didn't say much, really. She'd probably have talked more if you'd been there. She always did seem to like you better than me. As a boy, he had always been kind, if a bit tactless, and he hadn't changed in that respect. Why don't you pay her a visit? This is where she said she's staying. He wrote an address on a scrap of paper and passed it to me. He seemed to want to carry on reminiscing, and if I'm honest, I did want to hear more about what the girl was doing now. However, I just couldn't bear the thought of someone else barging in on my special place, and so I took my leave of him. As I made my way home, I ripped up the scrap of paper he'd given to me into little pieces. I wanted to remain forever the lively, wild boy doing endless spins up on the high bar the way she remembered me. And I wanted her always to be the little imp of a girl in my special place. The tiny shreds of paper scattered in the breeze. A few months later, I came across a small package in the mail at work one morning. As I turned it over to see the name of the sender, thinking it must be a submission from a reader, my hands started shaking. Written there in blue magic marker was Lily Greenwood, the name of the little girl in my special place. I tore into the package, opened the large notebook, and started reading. That little girl next door had had an altogether more magical place of her own. I felt I was being shown another, hitherto hidden, dimension to my own special place as I was drawn into her story. The little book room. There was once a small library on the first floor of a house. It was at the end of a long, dark corridor, in the most inconspicuous, quietest corner of all the house. Its heavy oak door was rarely opened, and for the most part remained firmly closed as if to discourage anyone from entering. Whoever did push open the door would find a little room with 3 walls entirely covered from floor to ceiling with bookshelves stuffed full with all manner of books that lorded it over the room with a self-important air. Crammed in beside antiquated tomes written in classical Chinese were the Meiji period works in foreign languages that the grandfather of the house had been so fond of, and next to them were around 200 small paperbacks covered with a light coating of dust. In short, this was a place where old books, having completed the term of their employment, could peacefully sleep away their retirement. And it was in this little book room, high up in the triangular space between the sloping ceiling and the top shelf of the bookcase to the right, beside the dormer window, that the little people had made their home. Just outside the window were the thick branches of the great Zelkova tree in the garden. In summer their dense greenery served as a curtain against the strong rays of the sun, while in winter the bare treetop made way for the sunshine, converting the little people's home into a warm sunroom. Other than the rather solemn atmosphere, with its peculiar smell of a mixture of dust, mildew, and top-quality paper, there really couldn't have been a better place for the little people to dwell. It would have been hard to find anywhere else where they could live so quietly and so completely out of the way of prying eyes. They had come to this house in a Tokyo suburb not long after it was built around the end of the Meiji period, and had remained here uneventfully ever since. It had been during the summer holidays of 1913, to be precise, that the 2 British-born little people had arrived at the house, shaken about in the basket carried by its present owner, Drake Greenwood. Drake had been in primary school at the time and attended his Year 3 classes every day dressed in a splash-pattern kimono with hakama. Little Drake had been handed the basket by his English teacher, Miss McLaughlin, just before she boarded a ship from Yokohama headed for home. Miss McLaughlin was an educationist who had come to Japan from England in the 1890s. She taught English at a girls' school in Yokohama, but instead of taking accommodation in the school dormitory, she lived on her own in the suburbs and taught basic English to the local school children in her spare time. Now, after 20 years in Japan, she was returning to her home country. When the Greenwood boy, whom she had known since he was a baby, came to say goodbye to her, she immediately ushered him into her now empty house. The animal-patterned carpet that Drake had delighted in walking on whenever he came to this house was now packed away somewhere. The framed pictures that had adorned the walls were all gone, and the room looked quite dreary. Miss McLaughlin took an old basket from amongst the luggage piled up in one corner and pressed it firmly into the hand of her smallest pupil. "Please make sure the little people in this basket always get their milk," she told him. "You should place a glass of milk on the windowsill for them once a day. Can you do that?" She looked steadily into Drake's eyes as he stared at her in astonishment. Miss McLaughlin had come to Japan in her 20s, and now there were white strands appearing in her flaxen hair. She held the boy's gaze with eyes that were a mysterious deep gray. "Drake Greenwood, you're a boy who loves little birds and insects, and you can keep a promise. Now, will you promise to do as I ask?" She spoke with an intense earnestness. "Yes, miss, I'll give them milk." I'll give them biscuits too sometimes. My mom's biscuits are really good, they'll like them. Drake's teacher had been telling him fairy stories ever since he was little, and so he knew just what she meant by little people. And for the first time, Miss McLaughlin smiled faintly, just as she did when she listened to Drake's answers in class. No, no, they don't need biscuits. The only food these little people take is milk, and that's the way it's always been. Every day you should fill this glass with milk and put it on the windowsill for them. You mustn't forget now. The little people cannot live unless humans do this for them. Do you understand? Miss McLaughlin took a small glass goblet out of her pocket. It was a beautiful blue, as if a piece of the sky had melted into the glass and sparkled in the sunlight streaming in through the window, making the gloomy room suddenly seem bright and cheerful. Drake felt a very slight buzz coming through the basket handle. He stiffened and looked up at Miss McLaughlin. The teacher abruptly reached out a hand and snapped open the clasps on the old basket. The lid creaked as she opened it a crack, no more than a couple of inches. As the blue light from the glass goblet filtered in, Drake caught sight of two tiny doll-like faces. A barely audible tinkle, like the top keys on the piano, tickled his ears. The brief, dreamlike moment ended as Miss McLaughlin closed the lid and told him, "They said that they don't mind being seen by you. They have agreed to go with you. Drake, please don't let anyone else see them, and look after them well." Before he knew what he was doing, Drake had taken the sparkling sky-blue goblet from his teacher. "Goodbye, and have a safe trip." Miss McLaughlin gave Drake a parting peck on the cheek and disappeared back into the house. I'll get to why Miss McLaughlin left the little people behind in the care of 10-year-old Drake Greenwood when she returned to her country later in the story. But first, I'll describe the little people and their arrival in the Greenwood household. There were two little people in the basket. Bulba Ash, with his sturdy hands, was a shoemaker by trade. His rather timid wife Fern was a stickler for cleanliness, and it was thanks to her good housekeeping that the book room at the Greenwoods was always free of cobwebs. Bulba and Fern were not settled into the little book room right away, however. To begin with, Drake put their basket at the back of his toy cupboard where there would be no fear of them being seen by anyone else. But 6 house mice were also living in that cupboard, and the basket proved to be a convenient teeth sharpener for them. The day passed uneventfully, but poor Bulba and Fern had to listen to the terrifying thunder of the mice gnawing away at it all night long. When Drake brought the milk the next morning and saw the tooth marks on the basket, he was so shocked he could hardly breathe. He immediately peeked inside the basket and saw that Bulba and Fern were safe, but they were in such a state of terror that they looked half dead. He had to find a safe place for them without a moment's delay, and went around the house in search of one. The ground floor reception room with the piano smelt far too stuffy, but then he remembered the first floor library where hardly anybody ever went. Drake ran straight upstairs and down the dark corridor and pushed open the heavy oak door. Inside, the room was bathed in honey-colored sunshine streaming in through the window in the roof. He soon found a very pleasant spot in the little triangular space between the top shelf of the tall bookcase and the sloping ceiling, bathed in shimmering light filtering in through the leaves of the Zelkova tree. He rushed back to his own room, wrapped Bulba in his handkerchief, and took him to the little book room. Bulba, too, was much taken by its peaceful atmosphere, so Drake went back to his room, gently lifted the basket out of his toy cupboard, and carried Fern upstairs. Fern arrived in the little book room clutching onto the luggage that Miss McLaughlin had placed in the basket, pale and exhausted like a migrant who had just survived a rough ocean voyage. Drake took some books off the shelf and made some secret steps that nobody but he and the little people would know about. Even if the maid did happen to come into the room to dust the shelves, as long as she didn't actually climb onto the books, she wouldn't be able to reach the little people's home. It was a few more days before the little people's home on the bookcase was ready. The basket was too big to fit on the shelf, so Drake had to build their new house himself. When at last it was finished, all anyone looking up at it from below would see was a shelf full of tightly packed books. Inside, he had made comfortable beds for the couple with 2 empty Gelb-sort cigarette boxes that he had sneaked out of his father's study. He gave some pink and white scraps of soft silk from the drawer of his mother's sewing machine to Fern, who used her own needle to sew them into curtains for their bedsteads. With what was left over, she made some charming undergarments for her baby, soon to be born. Drake enjoyed spending the summer days devising ways to complete the house for the little people. Bulba and Fern were still not entirely comfortable with being seen by Drake, and so they busied themselves with their handiwork out of his sight. Every day Drake would fill the blue glass goblet with milk, climb to the top of the bookcase, and place the goblet on the sill of the dormer window where there was no fear of it being noticed from outside. He never tired of seeing how the rather somber interior of the little book room would suddenly brighten as the blue glass sparkled in the sunlight. Thinking about how the lives of these little people depended on the milk he brought them daily, his heart quickened, and he was filled with a proud sense of responsibility. Fern was too high-minded ever to let Drake see how she used the milk in the meals she prepared for the Ash household, but their baby girl Iris, and then their boy Robin, thrived on the milk he brought them. Drake continued the milk deliveries for 1,477 days straight, but when he started middle school, he handed the role over to his little sister, Yukari. Yukari had already found out some years earlier about her big brother secretly filling the blue goblet with milk and taking it upstairs to the book room, but being a self-effacing child, she never asked him about it. Now, however, she saw how late he came home from school every day and realized that delivering the milk had become something of a burden to him, and so she offered to help. Yukari was a sickly child and often off school, so for some time she had been going to the little book room when Drake wasn't there to read books and magazines. When she started delivering the milk in his place, therefore, the little people were not afraid of her. Indeed, Bulba and Fern thought she was very well behaved and had grown quite fond of her. This new role was a welcome change for Yukari too. Instead of always being looked after by others, for once she was able to do something for someone else. Every time she delivered the blue glass goblet and saw how the little book room brightened in its presence, she felt an indescribable happiness well up within her. She started taking clothes and furniture from her own doll's house to the little people. House-proud Fern gazed around her home, suddenly filled with the shelves, floor lamp, and sparkling clean gas stove, and gave a contented sigh. But Yukari wasn't able to continue caring for the little people for very long. For the following winter, she contracted pneumonia and passed away. It was around this time that a strange little girl who'd been born abroad came to stay at the Greenwoods. Drake and Yukari's uncle June, who lived in Australia, sent his 12-year-old daughter, Joy, their cousin, to school in Japan. Unlike Yukari, Joy was healthy and strong-willed. It took her some time to get used to the rigid style of education in Japan, and as soon as she got home from school, she would steal into the upstairs library and immerse herself in a book. She had always loved reading, and for her the Greenwood's library was a veritable treasure trove. And, being sharp-eyed, she often caught sight of the little people. One day she fixed her steely gaze on Drake and demanded, "Drake, introduce me to those people on top of the bookcase." Drake, now 15 years old, was left blushing and tongue-tied. Since Yukari had passed away, he himself had been delivering the little people's milk again. He somehow managed to wriggle out of it this time, but that night, after consulting Bulba and the others, he decided to confide his secret to his cousin. "Promise me you won't tell anyone, and that you'll place the goblet of milk on the windowsill every morning." "Okay." Joy looked up at her cousin a little scornfully, but as soon as she took the small blue goblet in her hands, she was captivated. After a few moments she asked, "When will I get to meet the little people? If you keep it up for weeks and weeks without ever missing a day, I reckon they'll eventually show themselves to you." "Okay," said Joy, frowning. "I really like you, Drake. I'll keep my promise for you." And so, for 77 days in a row, without being seen by either Drake's parents or the maids, Joy left the goblet of milk on the windowsill in the little book room. On the evening of the 77th day, Iris and Robin came out of the house by the window and smoothly climbed down onto Joy's shoulder in a gesture of friendliness. Joy was so happy at the show of trust from the two children that she found herself half laughing and half crying. She continued delivering the milk for a long time thereafter. Iris and Robin were more used to her than anyone else, and when she came there to read books, they would always come onto her shoulder. Robin especially liked to swing from her long hair. She had been delivering the milk for 2,777 days when she married her beloved Drake, by then a university student, and became the young mistress of the Greenwood household. 20 years later, in June 1943, Drake Greenwood was an equable 40-year-old scholar of English literature, and his wife Joy a mother of 3 in her late 30s. And they were, of course, still living in the house with a little book room shaded by the big Zelkova tree in the garden. The house had survived the great earthquake and fire of 1923, although it now looked quite different with an added extension and refurbishments to several rooms and part of the garden. The one corner of the house that had not changed at all was the little book room. Living peacefully in the house now were Drake and Joy, their son Shin and daughter Lily, and the family of little people. Their other son, Finn, had that spring just left the house in which he'd lived for 17 years and was attending a high school in Kyoto. Even after her marriage to Drake, Joy had continued delivering milk to the little people. When Finn turned 8, after consulting with Balba and Fern, she handed the role over to her good-natured firstborn. And when Finn turned 13, he in turn passed it on to his 9-year-old brother Shin. Unlike Finn, who was a considerate boy, Shin was hot-tempered like his mother and rather reserved. He did have his kind side, though, and when he was little he would spend hours watching a damaged ant's nest, and on one occasion rushed out with some raw eggs for the horse of a cart overturned on a slope nearby. Shin was made to wait a long time before taking over the important role of delivering milk, but when at last he did so, he devised a cover to prevent dust getting into the milk, and adapted the tinplate toy refrigerator that had belonged to his Aunt Yukari so that it could take a chip of real ice. Thanks to him, that summer Fern could serve up meals made with fresh milk to the Ash family's dinner table. She was exceedingly grateful that there was no longer any fear of the milk going off. But there came a time when both Fern and Balba noticed that Shin's eyes had taken on a cold glint. Fern had been happier than anyone at his solicitude for them, but now she sadly shook her head and said, "What's happened to that boy? I'm starting to feel a bit afraid of him." Shin had handed the milk delivery over to his little sister Lily towards the end of the year before, and since turning 13, he hardly ever showed his face in the little book room. He stayed late at school to study for exams, after which he went to kendo practice, where he was apparently the favorite of the PE teacher, a former soldier. Upon starting middle school, he had informed his mother that he would be attending a military preparatory school. Joy had been speechless and felt a chill creep over her. Not a single Greenwood boy, nor indeed any of the family friends, had ever set their sights on being a soldier. Noting his mother's shock, Shin proudly reassured her that now he had decided his path in life. Studying was so much more fun. On the rare occasions Shin did actually go to the little book room, he would hurriedly pick out some books featuring words like patriotism or military on the cover and rush out again. Fern and Robin would watch him wistfully from the house by the window, but Shin would pretend he hadn't seen them. Lily, who had just turned 9 that year, was the Greenwoods' youngest child and a loyal milk deliverer. Those who had known Aunt Yukari would swear that she had been reborn in Lily. Even Balba and Fern, looking at the thin and sickly Lily, would feel as though the decades had rolled back and it was Yukari there before them. A long time ago, Yukari had told Balba and the others, "This room is lovely and quiet, but don't you find it damp and stuffy? Why don't we get Drake to make a hole to let some air in?" But before she could talk to Drake about it, she contracted pneumonia and passed away. Recently, the very same idea had unwittingly occurred to Lily. If only we could get some fresh air into this dusty book room, how much better life would be for Balba and his family, she thought. Lily was stronger than her aunt, and the moment her big brother Finn came home from school for the summer holiday, she asked him to make an air hole for them. Finn readily agreed, and immediately fetched some carpentry tools to make a small air hole by the dormer window, along with a little canopy outside to protect it from the rain. Inside, he placed a toy fan from Lily's doll's house. When Balba and Robin spun the blades as hard as they could, it would keep directing the cooler air into the room for quite some time. For the first time in around 30 years, fresh air flowed through the top branches of the Zelkova tree and into the little book room. Iris had just started learning how to knit, and now she dyed some spider silk to make rainbow-colored ribbons to tie to the fan. Listening to the excited voices of the little people, Lily smiled. "Finn, did you used to deliver the milk every day too?" she asked, looking up at her big brother adoringly. "Me? Of course I did. I started when I was 8 and didn't miss a single day in 5 years. Some days I got Mum to help me though. But things haven't changed much in Tokyo yet, have they? There doesn't seem to be any milk shortage here, anyway." Finn had grown up in the time he'd been away, and now he gazed down at his little sister sympathetically. "Lily, I think things are going to get tough from now on. It might be a bit difficult to keep up the milk deliveries." The two men. Robin had just celebrated his 8th birthday. Little people developed at the same speed as human children until the age of 5, gaining 1 year of age for every year passed, but after 5 they grew more slowly, gaining only 1 year for every 5 human years. While the members of the Greenwood household were steadily aging, therefore, both Balba and Fern were still in their 40s. Iris had been born when Drake was still in primary school, but whereas Drake was now 40, she was only 9. Even now, both she and Robin were still enjoying their childhood much as they had 30 years ago. After Balba had taught him his ABCs, Robin had started learning Japanese writing from a picture book. It was a cute little volume, what humans call a miniature book, but still it was bigger than he was. It had been a gift to Aunt Yukari from her parents on her 5th birthday. Neither Shin nor Lily had ever seen it, because Robin had come across it when he was about 5 or 6, and was so taken by it that he had pestered Balba to bring it back to their little house for him. Balba had thoroughly disapproved of taking such a big item from a lower shelf up to their home on the top of the bookcase, but Robin wouldn't listen, and so Balba and Fern had risked their lives to get it for him. Now they were glad they had done so, for their young son, who had always hated studying, was hard at work every day learning how to read and write Japanese from this book. After walking through brush land for 1,000 leagues, the tiger came to a place with no trees. In his sing-song voice, Robin read aloud from his favorite page about the tiger. He'd read it hundreds of times before, and could now recognize the same words anywhere and write them too. This morning, as always, Robin had stood the book up in the light beneath the dormer window and was reading about the tiger. The balmy September sunlight sparkled as it filtered through the leaves of the big tree outside, and he felt as though he was in a forest. He really felt sorry for the tiger. All the other animals, the polar bear, the deer, the wolf, and the wild boar, each had 2 pages of the book to themselves, and only the tiger was sitting in just 1 page, looking terribly cramped. "I know. I'll draw in some trees for the tiger in this blank space here." Robin ran to the storeroom to fetch a green crayon that Drake had dropped on the floor long ago, and Fern, being the thrifty person she was, had squirreled away. Robin hoisted it onto his back and returned to the book. "Robin, what are you doing?" called Fern from the kitchen. "Just studying." Apparently satisfied with his answer, Fern nodded and turned back to her work. She and Iris were washing the spider silk they'd gathered from around the little book room and dyeing it all the colors of the rainbow. Robin gave a little shrug and then carefully laid the book down flat on its back. He opened it on the page with the tiger, then mounted the green crayon like a horse and began prancing around the page, drawing in the vegetation. Suddenly, from the downstairs front room came the sound of a door being slammed, followed by some unfamiliar voices, alarmingly loud. Balba was seated at his work table, stitching some red shoes for Iris. Fern and Iris were in the kitchen, and Robin was drawing in his book, but they now all stopped what they were doing and pricked up their ears. They could hear Drake, who was normally so quiet, arguing about something. Then came the sound of a number of humans marching around the house. 2 sets of footsteps came up the stairs and along the corridor towards the little book room. Balba and Fern quickly grabbed the 2 children, and the little people all vanished into the darkest corner of the bookcase. Robin tried to ask something, but Balba put his hand over his mouth to silence him. The heavy oak door swung open and 2 men came in, the first people outside the Greenwood family to have set foot in the room for decades. The men looked sharply around at the wall-to-wall bookcases and then, as if moving in for the kill, began pulling out books, Red cloth European editions, splendid leather-bound anthologies, dusty old magazines, all thrown roughly onto the growing pile on the floor. Fern pressed her apron's skirt to her mouth to stop herself from crying out. Someone appeared in the doorway and stood coldly watching the two men. It was Joy, the little girl who had grown up in the house and eventually married Drake Greenwood. Now she was dressed plainly in Western-style clothes, her hair cut in a short bob. Biting her lip, she demanded, "Just what do you intend to do with all these old books? Most of them are for children anyway." "I see. So this is the sort of reading material you give your children, then," said one of the men with distaste, holding up a black book with a Russian title. Kropotkin. Actually, that one belonged to my father-in-law." "Whatever. We'll be taking it to the station with us as evidence anyway." The two men scooped up the pile of books from the floor and quickly exited the room. Joy followed them out and pulled the door closed after her. Their footsteps faded down the long corridor, and then a door slammed in the distance. A long, long silence fell over the house. Bulba and Fern looked at each other, their faces pale. This was the first time anything so ominous had happened since they came to live in this house all those decades ago. They felt keenly that something terrible was befalling the Greenwood household, although they had no idea what. Iris buried her face in her mother's skirt in terror. Fern felt sorry for her daughter, who was so timid she rarely even spoke, and reassured her, "Don't worry, everything will be okay. Let's finish up dyeing the silk thread. The busy bee has no time for sorrow, as they say." Those are the words of a great English poet, you know. Less fearful than Iris, Robin had been more surprised to learn that there were other humans outside the Greenwood family. Then, noticing his parents' subdued mood, he asked worriedly, "We will get our milk tonight, won't we? I hope Lily doesn't forget." "No, I'm sure she won't forget," Bulba said with a sigh, sitting down at his work table. That evening, the little people heard the quiet patter of Lily's footsteps as she brought them the blue glass goblet on a little tray as usual. After a moment's hesitation upon seeing the shambles in the little book room, she placed the goblet of milk on the sill of the dormer window as she always did. Even on a day like this, the sparkling blue glass lit up the room. Her eyelids were puffy as though she had been crying, and she muttered something to herself over and over again as she picked the books up off the floor one by one and put them back on the shelves. "Daddy hasn't done anything wrong. Daddy hasn't done anything wrong." As Bulba and Fern had feared, a dark shadow had fallen on the peaceful Greenwood household. Lily still came to the little room twice a day, once to collect the empty goblet and once to bring it back full of milk, but they could see the sadness in her face. Fern began using a little of the milk every day to make cheese that could be stored. For a long time, the little people didn't know why Lily was so sad, but then one day she and Shin came into the little book room arguing. "Daddy is bad. He's a liberalist. I've known that for ages. He only respects things from abroad and says that Japan is making a mistake by going to war. That makes him a traitor, doesn't it? That's why the police took him away. It's his own fault." "No, you're lying. Daddy hasn't done anything wrong." "So why did the police arrest him then, Lily?" "It's because he's done something wrong, of course." "No, you're lying. You're stupid. The police are stupid. There's no way Daddy would do anything bad." Bulba and Fern gazed on mournfully as Lily shouted angrily at her brother, quite unlike her usual self. Shin scanned the bookcases as if looking for something, and then glanced up at the dormer window with a grimace. Fern felt a chill run down her spine. "Lily, are you still doing that every day?" Shin asked. Sobbing, Lily gave a slight nod, relieved that he had changed the subject. But then Shin went on, "You shouldn't be doing that now, not in these times of crisis. That milk must be from the black market. There are sick soldiers on the battlefront who don't have enough milk to drink, you know." Lily looked at Shin in surprise. Times of crisis? Black market milk? On the battlefront? She had been hearing things like this at school every day, along with slogans like, "Don't ask for anything until we've won," or "Luxury is the enemy." But it had never occurred to her that it might have anything to do with the little people at home. All the children of the Greenwood household had been brought up to take a small amount of milk to the little people every day without fail to ensure their survival, and they had always done so unquestioningly. "But Shin, you used to do it too, didn't you?" Lily stared vacantly at her brother, as if he'd suddenly turned into a different species. Everyone else is out fighting for our country, but here at home you just don't get it, do you? None of you do, spat Shin and stormed out of the room. It was as though a pall had fallen over the little book room, despite the gold and green sunlight streaming merrily down on the blue goblet. In the little people's home, Fern drew her eyebrows together in a frown and thought it was just as well she had started making cheese to keep in case of emergencies. I'm going to have to be extra careful not to waste even a drop of milk from now on. Who knows what might happen? Balba had remained seated at his work table stitching the red shoes for Iris. The leather was top quality, taken from the cover of an old notebook during the exchange between Lily and Shin. He listened without a word, aware that hard times were to come, worse than any they had known before. While they had been enjoying their peaceful life here in the quiet little book room, a terrible storm had apparently been raging outside. Balba knew nothing of the unfortunate sequence of events that had happened after the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. He had no idea that numerous battles had been fought, nor that tens of thousands of people had shed blood in a war of Japan's own making, much less that his own native Britain was now Japan's enemy. But now even the little book room had been affected, with those two men storming in and hauling Drake Greenwood off to the police station, and Drake's own son calling his father a traitor right before Balba's eyes. And he was suddenly keenly aware of the severity of the storm outside. He rested his small head, now flecked with gray, on his work table. I don't understand. Whatever happened to Shin? He was such a sweet child. No other child of the Greenwood household has ever changed like that, so why him? He just couldn't understand why Shin had changed. Irritated at his own sense of powerlessness, he picked up the shoe again and started sewing at a furious pace. Balba, don't wear yourself out, pleaded Fern. I wonder what Lily thinks about it all? If she turns into a patriot like Shin, then whatever will become of us. Balba signaled to her that Iris was listening. Iris was seated next to her mother knitting some rainbow-dyed spider silk into beautiful ribbons. Whenever she wasn't cleaning or in the kitchen helping her mother prepare meals, Iris would spend her time knitting. She used the little ivory knitting needles from a shepherdess doll that Fern had inherited from her own mother Beatrice Belladonna took back in England. Beatrice had taught Fern how to knit and, according to little people custom, she in turn had passed on the skill to her own daughter. Fern preferred being up and about cleaning or making cheese, and so now Iris did all the knitting and darning for the Ash household. Fern turned her gaze from her daughter to her son. Robin had climbed up to the dormer window and was looking intently outside. Fern was about to remind him to get on with his studies, but she held her tongue. What good will studying do him in any case? There must be something more important for him to learn about than how to read. Had they done the right thing by teaching their children that the only people in the world besides themselves were the big people in the Greenwood family who brought them milk? She sighed and busied herself using a candle to wax the cotton thread that Balba was using to stitch the shoes so that it wouldn't snag. Robin was looking at two pigeons sitting on a branch outside the dormer window. He wasn't thinking about his studies, or about his joy at talking with the tiger in that book he liked so much. What he was thinking was, I need to know about the world outside. Right now I'm locked away in here. I'm hemmed in, just like that tiger. His world, which had consisted of just his own family, the big people in the Greenwood family whose role it was to bring them food, and his magnificent tiger friend in the picture book, had been utterly shattered when those two big men had burst into the little book room. As the days passed, that incident gradually took on more and more importance in his mind. Lily had been really downcast ever since, and his own father, too, had grown noticeably taciturn. His mother had become even more finicky and would put any milk that Robin or Iris left undrunk, however little, into a small pot to boil up again for reuse, and used half of all the milk that Lily brought them to make cheese. Supposing I got on that pigeon's back and flew up into the big wide sky, what would I see? I might discover that there are more than just 4 or 5 people in the world. There might be dozens or even hundreds. Robin gazed longingly at the pigeons outside the window. The pair of them, one white and one gray, had been living on that branch for some time now. Even their feet, tightly gripping the branch, looked about 3 times as big as Robin himself. But Robin remembered having seen a picture of a person riding a big horse over 3 times their size. One day I'm going to go outside and make friends with those pigeons. And I'll get them to let me ride on their backs like horses. First of all, though, he had to come up with a plan to get out of that room onto the roof and into the outside world. After lunch, Bulba and Fern went to bed for their afternoon nap, and Iris sat in her little rocking chair and carried on knitting as usual. As she worked the needles, the ribbon grew longer and longer and sparkled in the light. "Iris, I'm just going to have a look at the air vent in the roof. Somehow it doesn't feel like any fresh air is getting in," Robin told his sister. Iris looked at him curiously, and then nodded as if in agreement. Robin's heart began pounding. He climbed smoothly up to the ceiling and tried to move the fan that Finn had installed in front of the air vent one summer holiday. He shook it with all his strength, but it didn't budge an inch, so he climbed through its blades and tentatively looked out through the air vent. The rain cover obscured his view of the sky, and the air flowing down on him was hot but refreshing. He held up his arms and, using his foot to propel himself from the frame covering the fan, he made a leap for the ledge outside the air vent. Being light and flapping his legs to gain extra distance, he was soon standing beneath the rain cover. There, bathed in a deluge of sun rays and endless waves of air, Robin discovered how small he really was. Suppressing the urge to yell, "Yo-ho!" he gazed up at the big tree. Its branches stretched out higher and wider than he'd ever imagined, casting their shade over the black mountainous ridge of the Greenwood house's roof and the garden encircled by dahlias and hollyhocks. And beyond that, he could see a grove of green trees and an expanse of red, black, and blue roofs. If, say, 4 or 5 little people and 4 or 5 big people were living under each of those, that meant there were an awful lot of people in the world. What's more, if he really strained his eyes, at the bottom of that hill in the distance there were countless more small, black-tiled roofs. And even farther beyond that was the gleaming sweep of the gray-blue sea. I had no idea. I never knew the world was so big. Robin's eyes filled with tears. Iris knew that her little brother had gone through the air vent in the roof and ventured outside where not even Bulba or Fern had ventured even once these past 30 years. 2 minutes passed, 5 minutes passed, but Robin didn't come back. Iris began to feel afraid. She had just put her knitting to one side and stood up, thinking she had better wake their parents from their afternoon nap, when 2 little feet appeared in the hole. Robin looked terribly serious as he went without a word to the corner of the room and stood there staring at the wall. That boy has seen the outside world, and one of these days, I too will have to see it for myself. Iris gazed up at the hole of the air vent, her eyes filled with both fear and longing. Then she got back on with her knitting as if she hadn't noticed anything amiss. A fairy story. Gradual changes were happening in the little book room as well as outside. While Bulba and Fern were taking their afternoon nap, Robin worked at widening the opening of the air vent using a chisel and plane from Bulba's toolbox. He wanted to make it big enough for even broad-shouldered Bulba to be able to get through it easily should this ever become necessary. Robin also made friends with a gentle, gray pigeon by the name of Arlo, one of the pigeons that came to roost on the branches of the big tree. Robin had been watching it from beneath the rain canopy for a while, so when he noticed that it seemed intensely irritated by an itch behind its wing, since nobody was around, he called out to it. "Hello. Is something wrong?" The pigeon fixed a round, red eye on the unfamiliar little boy. Then, as if it couldn't stand it anymore, said, "Would you be so kind as to scratch my back for me?" Robin nervously went up to the big bird and with all his might scratched the point at the root of the wing that seemed to be the source of its irritation. "Oh, that feels better," said Arlo, evidently enjoying the relief. They both began to feel a little more comfortable with each other. The next day, Robin was happy when, unbeckoned, Arlo left the group of pigeons and flew alone over to him. He seemed to have taken a liking to little Robin's sociable nature. They hadn't been friends for 10 days yet when Robin told Arlo, "I'd love to be able to sit on your back and fly through the sky, even just a little." Arlo readily agreed, so Robin plucked up the courage to scramble up his large friend's red leg and up onto his back. But the moment he touched Arlo's feathers, the pigeon flapped his wings and flew away, and he tumbled off onto the roof and hastily clutched hold of a roof tile. Sorry. I'm sorry. Arlo came back apologizing profusely. But his eyes were laughing. It was just so ticklish I couldn't bear it. There's no way I can carry you. Robin gave up the idea of flying, for the present, anyway, and settled for listening to Arlo talk about life. The pigeon was very well informed. He knew all about Drake Greenwood, who had left this house one day in September and still hadn't come home. Drake was now locked up in a cage somewhere, and his wife Joy was regularly taking feed to him. He also told Robin that the Greenwood's two maids had returned to their homes in the countryside, and that Joy had taken up the lawn in the garden to make a vegetable patch, planting it with autumn seedlings. Robin could see them with his own eyes. He saw that not just the Greenwoods, but all the other gardens in the neighborhood had been planted with vegetables. Not only that, Arlo told him, but the new mound of earth in the corner of the garden was something called an air raid shelter. Meanwhile, in the little book room, Balba was busy making shoes. He had taken the leather cover from a magnificent black notebook and was now making it into some lace-up shoes for Robin. It looked as though there might be enough for him to make some brogues for Fern out of it too. Balba, what on earth has got into you? She asked, puzzled. You're obsessed with making shoes lately. Iris's red shoes, your own brown brogues, and now pairs for Robin and me. I'm a shoemaker by profession, it's what I do. But I must admit I do feel like I have someone on my back urging me faster. Work faster. I don't quite understand it myself. Balba's hand-stitched shoes were of the highest quality, and a pair should last 20 or 30 years, living in the little book room. But still he's making new pairs for us. Even though the pair I'm wearing should last another 10 or so years. Fern had a terrible premonition. Could it be that he's preparing for a day when we won't be able to stay in our quiet little hideaway anymore? Trying to shake the thought from her mind, she laughed lightly and said, Balba, if you make new shoes for all of us, perhaps we should set up a dance club again, the way we used to. Memories of the large dance parties the little people had held long ago briefly floated into Balba's mind. During the midsummer festival, the air heavy with the scent of ripe wheat, the little people would dance the night away, wearing out their shoes so that Balba's grandfather and father would have their work cut out for them making shoes for some time afterwards. Fern noticed the serene expression come over her husband's face as he was sunk in thought, as if reminiscing about the past. But it didn't last for long. He averted his eyes from her and didn't answer. Changes were taking place around little Lily Greenwood, too. Her mother Joy was often out on errands to do with her father, and the maids had all left, so Lily was kept busy with household chores after coming home from school. Coal was in short supply, and it was some time since they'd had any gas. They couldn't get hold of charcoal either. Lily collected firewood from the thicket in the garden. It was still too green, but once it had dried out a little, she could burn it in the charcoal stove. She still took the daily milk, sometimes substituted with powdered milk, to Balba and his family, who noticed how terribly chapped her hands had become. Every time she filled the blue glass goblet with milk and took it to the little people, Lily recalled the stinging words of her brother Shin. You shouldn't be doing that in these times of crisis. Even soldiers don't have enough milk to drink when they fall ill. Was it a luxury for her to be drinking milk? And was she really wrong to give just a bit of it to the little people whom she loved so much? Just a tiny amount was enough to keep them alive. They were so precious to her. Whenever she felt distraught thinking about her father who hadn't come back, they would quietly share in her sadness from their home on top of the bookshelf. She was determined to look after them as best she could. But then it wasn't just her brother Shin. Lily was in her second year at a state primary school, where she and her fellow pupils were daily exhorted to be noble children of the empire. Words like crisis and unpatriotic and traitor sounded darkly shameful to her. Today was the 8th of October. Lily and her classmates gathered at the shrine to Hachiman, the god of war and protector of Japan, to join in the school drills. The footsteps of all the pupils crunched on the gravel as they ran circuits. They all wore white headbands and ran in silence. They were not allowed to laugh or chat amongst themselves, but then, they didn't have the strength to do more than just run. Halfway round her second lap, Lily developed a painful stitch in her side. As she started on her third lap, she was gasping for breath and unable to speak. She felt she was about to faint, but still she pushed on to run another lap. And then, when she'd gone about half of the fourth lap, everything around her suddenly turned bright yellow and she dropped to her knees on the gravel. When she opened her eyes a while later, she was lying at the top of the stone steps to the shrine, while the rows of white headbands were still crunching their way around the circuit. At her side stood Shin, barefoot and wearing a headband. He was the squad leader for Year 6. "Greenwood," barked the PE teacher. "Take your sister home." His tone made it clear he despised Shin for having a weakling sister. "Traitor," spat Shin, his eyes narrowed. Humiliated, Lily stood up without his help. "I'll take myself home." Deep down, she still believed he would come after her, but nobody followed and Shin's footsteps echoed in her ears as he took his place back in line. When she finally reached home, her mother was on her way out of the door, dressed in baggy work pants and her arms full of bags. "Lily, what's up?" "I'm not feeling well. They must have made you run too hard. Get your futon out and lie down for a while, will you?" But Lily didn't want to stay at home alone. "Are you going to see Daddy? Take me with you." Joy gave her a stern look. "No, it's no place for children." How could she possibly take her daughter to see her father, who had been reduced to skin and bones in just a month inside that flea and lice-ridden building with iron bars? Even now, when anything made of iron, from pots and pans to temple bells, had been requisitioned, that place had big iron bars. And what's more, she didn't even know if she herself would be allowed to see him today. She pulled herself together and quietly said, "Lily, what would be most helpful for me would be for you to stay behind and look after the house," and left carrying a packed lunch and fresh underwear for her husband. When Lily turned to go back into the house after seeing her mother off, she caught sight of a gray pigeon perched on the low roof outside the little book room. As it spread its wings and flew over to the big tree, along with the loud flapping of its wings, she could hear a faint flute-like sound. Robin was on the pigeon's back. Arlo landed gently on a big branch, and Robin opened his tightly shut eyes and looked around. "I did it. I flew on the pigeon's back." But Lily was feeling dizzy and feverish and didn't notice Robin as she went back inside. That night, Balba and the others waited and waited, but Lily didn't come. When it got to 7:30, Fern took out some of the cheese she'd stored in old silver chocolate wrapping and, hiding her irritation, laid it out on the table. "Well, everyone, let's have dinner," she said as if nothing was amiss. What on earth could have happened to Lily? Surely she hasn't stopped coming for good? They were all wondering the same. But neither Balba nor Fern said anything as they ate their cheese in silence. The little people were feeling how terribly dreary and cheerless dinner was without the blue glass goblet filled with milk. It wasn't just a matter of it being too dry or tasteless. The milk that little Drake, Yukari and Joy, and now the new generation with Finn, Shin and Lily, would leave beneath the window every day without fail was not just food. It was a tangible sign of their love for and devotion to the little people whose lives were more important to them than anything else. Dinner was over quickly. "I hope nothing has happened to Lily," Balba said finally. "She left for school early this morning and came back home soon afterwards. She didn't look very well, and her face was very pale," added Robin, caught up in the moment. Balba and Fern looked at each other. "Robin, did you see her?" Fern's eyes were as big and round as plates. I just heard her footsteps and thought she sounded very weak," he said hurriedly. Balba and Fern didn't say anything, but their faces showed they were thinking they would have to prepare for worse things to come. "Robin," said Balba at length, "how did you get outside?" "I didn't just go outside, I flew on the pigeon's back." Iris was gazing up at the air vent in the roof. Fern caught sight of the fresh chisel marks. "Robin, you didn't," she exclaimed loudly, clutching the hem of her apron. Just then, they heard the sound of footsteps outside the little book room and all at once clamped their mouths shut. It was Lily bringing them the glass of milk on a tray, her hands trembling. She went up to the bookshelf and stood there as if petrified, lacking the strength to climb up and leave the glass of milk on the shelf under the window. Robin moved to help her, assuming it was his role, but Fern restrained him. More footsteps sounded outside the room, the quiet footsteps of an adult. Joy came in. Seeing Lily there, she hurried over to her side. "Lily, let me do that for you." Still in her baggy work pants, Joy climbed nimbly onto the bookshelf and picked up the blue glass goblet. Bulba and the others listened to the sound of her pouring milk into it and watched as she placed it under the window once more. Filled with foaming milk, as always the bright, cheerful rays of light from the blue glass made the room sparkle. Now then, Lily, do you think you can sleep now? You don't need to worry anymore, so you can get a good night's sleep, okay? Joy said. Lily said nothing, her face expressionless. Lily, please answer me. Did your teacher say anything to you this morning? Lily shook her head. What about Shin? Lily hung her head. Joy sighed. Well, you'd better get it off your chest now. What did he say to you? Haltingly, Lily began telling her about the events at the Hachiman shrine that morning. But as she spoke, she had the feeling that what she really wanted to talk about was something else altogether. Is that what happened? So you ended up coming home all by yourself. Joy finished for her. Lily, it's not easy for Shin either, you know. He really believes that he's letting the country down by having a father who's been arrested and a sickly sister. He's determined to be a credit to the Japanese Empire to make up for all the other traitors in the Greenwood household. He's always going on at me too, saying things like, you have to work harder for our country. But you know what, Lily? I really can't do as he says. And I can't think that either your father or the fact that you're not strong is letting the country down. And what's more, I don't think the police are right to detain your father, who hasn't done anything wrong, all this time without any investigation just because they think he has bad ideals. And I can't believe that our country is right to go to war with other countries when it can't even feed its own children with a weak constitution. She wiped the sweat from Lily's forehead with the palm of her hand. I'm sorry, Lily. When you came home alone this morning, I had my head full of other things. You know your grandpa in Nigiri? I just heard that he was so worried about your father that he fell ill and is in a critical condition. Grandma is old too, and I can't just leave her on her own, can I? As I was going out this morning, I was hoping that they might release your father, since it's a terrible thing to lose your parents, and you can never get them back again. But the prison officers just yelled at me. Lily raised her eyes and looked at her mother. She had always been a bit eccentric and interesting and had never lost her girlish quality. Now Lily saw a thin, calm woman wearing baggy work pants. Far from having lost the youthful edge she'd always had when Daddy was at home, she hadn't been disheartened at all and was a likable woman with her feet firmly on the ground. There's something else that's worrying me. Lily spoke up suddenly. Something that Shin said to me a long time ago. He said that if we have any milk, we should give it to sick soldiers. He said we shouldn't give it to those people, so if I'm drinking black market milk and giving it to the little people, doesn't that make me a traitor? Joy smiled irritably. Lily, think about it. Why shouldn't you give just a little of your own milk to people you love? She said, holding Lily in her characteristically fierce gaze. Neither you nor Shin realize it, but sometimes a lot of people can be wrong. So many important people now are doing terrible things that they justify with those fine words, for your country, even me. If it hadn't been for Daddy, I would have been like Shin and would now be thinking of our country as something beautiful. But I realized for the first time how mistaken our country was when it locked him up because they thought he was dangerous. I'm sure Daddy will be released soon, you know. But if by any chance he isn't, I won't be able to leave Tokyo. If I'm not here to take food into him, he will die of starvation. And so, Lily, if the day comes when children can't stay in Tokyo, I want you and Shin to go to your grandparents' house in Nigiri. And I want you to promise me that, wherever you go, you will always keep giving milk to the little people. Will you do that for me? Lily nodded fearfully. I can't help believing that if you can keep those vulnerable little people alive, then Daddy will be saved too. I'm sure Shin would laugh at me though. Daddy was given the little people and their blue glass goblet by his teacher, an Englishwoman, when he was a little boy. That alone isn't so important, but while he was looking after them and taking them their milk, something took root in his heart that affects the way he sees the world. That's why he can't agree with our country going to war, for example. Bulba and Fern were watching Joy from the top of the bookcase as she continued speaking quietly, as much to convince herself as to encourage little Lily. You know, a long time ago I read a book that told the story of how the widow Whitgift saved the fairies, or the people of the hills as they were known. The widow Whitgift lived in a place called Romney Marsh. Long ago, under the English King Henry VIII's reformation of the church, the people of the hills who had lived all over England since olden times ended up having to leave the country. Only one, Puck, did not give in to the sound of the church bells or the threat of the salt tide. The people of the hills loved the beautiful meadows and forests of England and wanted to live there forever, and their wailing echoed through Romney Marsh. The widow Whitgift heard them and felt terribly sorry for them. She sent her own sons to help them sail to France, and after they reached safety, they gifted the widow and all her descendants with a strange power of sight that meant they could even see through millstones. "Daddy has that gift too, doesn't he?" asked Lily, remembering all the stories her father had told her when she was little. "Well, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But when I read that book, I decided that if I ever got to meet anything like a fairy, I would be the sort of person to care for them. And that's what happened when I started helping Drake by taking milk to the little people." "Drake is Daddy, right?" Lily asked shyly. "That's right. And I can't quite explain it, but while we were taking the blue glass goblet filled with milk to the little people, we couldn't help feeling that somehow a bond had formed between us. Our country is now at war with England, the country that Balba's family is from. It's our enemy, but suppose Balba and his family, thanks to your father taking them in several decades ago, turn out to be the last little people in all the world. Isn't it terribly important we keep them alive? Over the last few decades, there have been many wars, so even the few remaining little people hidden away in various villages and towns around the world are probably in danger of becoming extinct. So if we can get Balba and his family safely through this, then people all over the world who care for the little people will thank us for it. You can be sure of that." The dark, brooding cloud cleared from Lily's feverish face. "Oh, but I'm not even sure I can keep Drake or the children safe, let alone the little people," thought Joy as she helped Lily back along the darkened corridor to the living room. Meanwhile, the four little people sat drinking the fresh milk in a convivial family atmosphere. The delay in the milk being delivered and the discovery of Robin's excursions outside were forgotten. Neither Balba nor Fern could believe that they were the only four little people left in the entire world. "I've never heard of the widow Whitgift. Our ancestors weren't so much fairies as dwarves. And they still lived in England even after that damned religious reformation," Balba said. "Yes, that's right," agreed Fern. "And there is always someone ready to bring us our blue glass full of milk wherever we are." For all her natural tendency to worry, even she looked happy in the light cast by the blue glass goblet that Joy had just brought their milk in. Arlo the pigeon, Robin, and the tiger. The old year came to an end, and the new year started. In the little book room, life was getting more difficult by the day for Balba and his family. More often than not, Lily brought them the blue glass goblet filled with a watery concoction made from milk powder. Worried that her family were not getting the nutrition they needed, Fern sometimes supplemented their meal with a little of the cheese she had made from real milk. During the winter, as frost flowers sparkled on the dormer window, Balba's legs ached and he spent most of the time in bed. Iris undid one of the old woolen gloves that long ago Shin had left behind in the little book room, which Fern had squirreled away in her storeroom, and used the wool to knit a warm cover for her father. The old yarn had lost its elasticity and kept breaking, but by binding it with some spider silk, she managed to produce a soft and fluffy camel-colored blanket. Robin had also become lethargic with the cold, but when spring came he got his energy back, and whenever Balba and Fern let down their guard, he would make his escape through the air vent in the ceiling. The big tree, having lost all its leaves over winter, was now covered with a cloud of pale green shoots, and at its foot the buds on a flowering quince had opened into white and pink shell-like blossoms. Towering over the other shrubs and plants in all the neighboring gardens, like a lighthouse, was the spectacular white crown of the magnolia tree. This was to be the last time Tokyo would enjoy the scene of early spring for some time, due to the imminent threat of air raids that would burn everything to the ground. Last year, Robin had still known nothing of the big wide world outside, and now whenever he escaped from the little book room, he could hardly believe how beautiful this view was. Joy was overjoyed that her beloved Drake, locked up in the detention center in Nakano for being an unpatriotic liberal, had survived the winter. When she was at last allowed to meet him, Drake gazed at the buds from the garden quince that she took him and gently stroked their petals. Even when Drake's father in Nigeri, a mountainous area snowbound in winter, had died, soon followed by his mother, he had not been allowed out. There was much talk of evacuating all the school children to the countryside. Lily was now in her third year at primary school, while Shin had managed to win a place at a prefectural middle school. A high proportion of this school's students went on to join a military preparatory school for the Army or the Naval Academy, as Shin hoped to do too. From time to time, a letter would arrive from their elder brother Finn, who was at school in Kyoto, asking after his father. Apparently, he managed to send these letters without them being seen by the school censors, for they were full of skepticism towards the student war effort. And he often complained about the lack of food. At the end of February, Joy sent him a parcel containing some rice cakes she got in exchange for a kimono. It just so happened that nobody was around when it arrived, and he decided to keep them all for himself, but these were hard rice cakes made from pounded glutinous rice that had to be cooked before he could eat them. He made light of this in a comical account of how, since there wasn't any fire or heating in his dormitory, he'd sneaked an electric soldering iron back to the room, but it just burned the rice cake without cooking it. And since the smell of burning would bring his classmates running, he gobbled them down still raw with burnt patches. He also wrote emotionally about having seen off a lot of his seniors in December the previous year as they were sent to the front to die. One day in May, Robin climbed up to the air vent and stood gazing out at the dazzling sunlight. The leaves of the big tree swayed in the refreshing breeze, and the blue sky spread endlessly overhead. After the rain 2 or 3 days earlier, the sandy soil glistened like gold dust, and the sweet smell of earth tickled his nose. Robin left the protection of the rain canopy and crossed several warm roof tiles to a spot in the shade of the tree and sat down to wait for his gray friend. Recently, Arlo the pigeon had been very busy. He only showed himself for a short while on rainy days and hadn't come yesterday either, so maybe he would come today. Honeybees were buzzing around the large blossoms of the taro plants and colorful azaleas. Robin. Hearing someone whisper his name, Robin turned round. His eyes grew big as saucers. Iris's small face was peeping out from beneath the rain canopy. "Iris," he stammered. "Robin, please come and help me," Iris said fearfully. Robin stepped carefully over the roof tiles and went to her side. "So I've seen outside too at last. But Robin, I'm so scared I can't move." Robin took his sister's hand and helped her sit under the rain canopy where she could gaze at the scenery in safety. Iris's little heart was beating so hard even he could hear it. Iris hid her eyes behind her hands. Then slowly she took her hands away and gazed joyfully at the blue sky. Robin could well understand his sister's surprise. "I myself was so excited the first time. But Iris is always such a goody-goody. I wonder what made her decide to come outside?" A loud sound of flapping wings approached from afar. "It must be Arlo coming in to land on a branch of the big tree. Iris, a friend of mine is coming. He's big, but he won't do anything bad. He's a pigeon, and his name is Arlo," he explained. "I know," said Iris, laughing. "I've often watched you getting on his back from the dormer window. Is it fun?" "Robin, don't tell your friend that I'm here outside. But I want you to ask him if he's seen any other little people like us around here. And about the bad things happening in the world outside." She had hardly opened her mouth lately, but now her words came out in a rush. Robin stared at his sister in surprise. "Cuckoo," called Arlo softly from the tree branch. "You know, Robin, for some time now Mother and Father seem to have felt something is amiss, and they are very scared. Even so, neither of them are doing anything about it. We have to know, Robin. What is going to happen?" "Cuckoo," called Arlo a little louder. As if drawn by his voice, Robin ran out from under the rain canopy. Seeing his friend's calm and loyal figure perched on his usual branch waiting for him, Robin relaxed. "Nice weather, isn't it?" Arlo said. "Where have you been?" asked Robin. Arlo looked at Robin with his thoughtful eyes and answered, "My friends moved back to the countryside yesterday, the ones who often used to come here, like Shireen and Yohei. You know, that lady pigeon with white feathers, and that gray young'un. I don't have many friends left here now. This is my chance to ask if anything is going to happen," thought Robin. Arlo, is something bad about to happen? Are your friends running away from something? Arlo tilted his head and looked searchingly at little Robin. Then he shook his head and asked, "Don't you know? Terrible things are happening. Didn't I tell you about what happened last summer in Weno?" Robin shook his head and said nothing. "I suppose you know that the humans have started a war? Since last year, things have taken a turn for the worse. Food has been scarce for us, of course, and for the humans too, you must know that much. But in August last year, all the animals in Weno Zoo were killed so that they couldn't go on the rampage if Tokyo were to be hit by an air raid. That is, if the enemy planes attack the city." Robin knew about zoos. He had lots of friends in a zoo in the picture book. Was the tiger killed too? Yes, the lion and tiger and leopard. Over the past 2 or 3 years, many of my friends had been living there. At least there they didn't have to worry about being shot and eaten, and there was a lot more food there than outside. But from what I heard from those pigeons, it was terrible to see the lion and tiger killed. Some of the zookeepers were against killing the animals right until the very end, but there was nothing they could do against orders given by the state. And the story of the elephant, such an intelligent animal, Arlo noticed Robin's lower lip trembling and stopped talking. After hearing about the tiger's death, Robin hadn't heard another word he said. The tiger in his favorite picture book had been shot. He didn't suppose there was any undergrowth for the tiger to run around in at Weno Zoo. It had spent all its time locked up in that small cage, and then on top of that someone had shot it. Robin covered his eyes with one arm and sobbed uncontrollably. Arlo looked discreetly away. He couldn't bear to see his little friend so sad all of a sudden. Finally, Robin rubbed his eyes and said shyly, "I'm sorry, it's just that I used to be friends with a tiger." "So, the war, is it coming closer?" "Well, not even I know that. What I do know is that ever since last autumn when those animals were shot, rich people have been busy moving the contents of their houses to the countryside. The funny thing is that it's the big houses that are now lying empty. People call it evacuation. I suppose they've started to think that it's dangerous to stay in Tokyo." Robin thought he'd better tell Iris everything that Arlo had said, leaving nothing out. Then he remembered his sister's other question. "Uncle Arlo, do you know of any other little people? Have you ever come across anyone else like me?" Arlo didn't seem to understand the meaning of his question. "We don't call moving evacuation. We just say that we're moving home." "That's not what I meant. Arlo, how many other little people have you seen living around here?" Robin asked impatiently. Arlo looked at him in surprise. "You're the only one I've ever met. Haven't you got any friends? Aren't you lonely?" he asked, looking a bit uncomfortable. "My sister Iris is right there, you know," but Robin kept his mouth shut. Something told him he shouldn't scare this gentle friend of his. "You've got a mother and father, haven't you?" "Well, I've got a family too." Then he asked, "Have you got any children?" Arlo flinched. "Do I look that old?" "I'm too young for that, I'll have you know. Although lately there hasn't been much food around, so I've got as skinny as the older birds get. My parents moved this spring to Shinshu. Now I'm left behind on my own." Presently Arlo said goodbye to Robin and flew off to the woods around the Hachiman shrine. He cut a lonely figure all on his own. Robin felt awful that he hadn't really given Arlo's situation much thought before now. Arlo stayed behind in Tokyo, even though there's not enough food here, because of his friendship with me, but I never realized it. That night, when Balba and Fern were fast asleep in their gelb-sort beds, Robin whispered to Iris. All the lights had long been turned off in the little book room, and it was pitch black. "Sis, are you awake?" "Yes," Iris whispered back. When Robin told her everything he'd heard from Arlo, leaving nothing out, she sighed and said, "So there aren't any other people like us around here." "Robin, I'm worried. I don't say much and am busy knitting all the time, but I'm always listening. I hear what Shin and Lily and Joy are saying. The Greenwood family, especially Lily and Joy, are trying to look after us. And our mother and father believe in them. But I can feel that outside there is a more terrible power than Lily and Joy can protect us from. And so I thought we should look for other little people to be sure we're not the only ones left in the world." "Are we the only ones left?" Robin whispered. "Maybe we are, maybe we aren't," Iris said in a low voice. "But we shouldn't let that discourage us. It's great that you were brave enough to make friends with that pigeon, Robin. But I don't know how long Arlo will be able to stay here. If there's nothing left to eat in Tokyo, he will have to fly off to the countryside, won't he? Iris didn't answer. Even after Iris's breathing had deepened in sleep, Robin remained awake for a long while. All the animals in the cute little zoo book that he had played with hundreds of times passed one by one before his eyes. The camel with a hump like a bunch of bananas, the lion and leopard and polar bear, the big elephant, and the tiger he liked so much. We don't want to be killed. We don't want to die. We want to live. All the animals in the zoo opened their mouths and roared angrily. Their furious voices reverberated through him as he lay there enveloped in the darkness. Arlo the pigeon, too, had flown in from somewhere and was flapping his gray wings, shouting together with the animals. We don't want to be killed. We don't want to die. We want to live. Gradually, with his fists tightly clenched, he slipped into sleep. Acorns aren't from Zelkova trees. The rainy season had started early that year and was already over by the end of June, and summer arrived with July. One day, a parcel with a Red Cross logo arrived from Joy's parents in Sydney. They had sent it via a Red Cross ship intending it to arrive in time for Christmas 1942, but it had only now reached its destination almost miraculously in July 1944. What a route it must have taken on its way to the Greenwood household. Lily carefully undid the string and opened it up. 2 packets of white sugar and half a dozen bars of soap, 2 cans each of sardines and corned beef, half a pound of wool, beautiful thick sky blue wool, and half a dozen towels, and a bar of chocolate. Lily buried her nose in the fluffy new pure wool, saying it smelt of her grandmother in Sydney, and then in the thick starched towels that smelt of her grandfather. "But you've never met your grandparents," exclaimed Joy, laughing. She was stroking the string from the package to straighten out the kinks in it, tears glistening in her eyes. Joy stowed the cans away in the cupboard for the day when Drake would come home, and they could sit at the dinner table as a family again. She had now grown so cautious that she believed that if she took foreign-made food to Drake in prison, she could be taken for a spy. That night, after opening the parcel, Lily made sure to take a small amount of sugar and a piece of chocolate to the little people, along with their milk. The sweet taste of chocolate and sugar momentarily warmed the hearts of everyone in the Greenwood and Ash households. Even Shin, normally so censorious, relaxed his frown when he tasted the sweet syrup spread on the salted hot cakes Lily baked for him. One day near the end of July, Fern had been feeling a sense of foreboding all morning. The sugar Lily had given them was finally running out, so she decided to bake a sweet milk cake for the family's lunch. The flour for the cake had come from some acorns that Robin had gathered outside and given to Balba to grind into flour. Lately, they had been turning a blind eye to Robin's escapades, and he was now openly climbing through the air vent and going outside once a day. Given the wateriness of the milk Lily was bringing them, Fern had resolved to supplement their meals with cake and so had resigned herself to him going out onto the roof to collect acorns. She could hear Balba grinding the acorns into flour in the next room. Having finished making new shoes for everyone in the household some time ago, he had changed his occupation to miller. He had taken an old pencil sharpener from amongst the odds and ends in Fern's storeroom and converted it to a flour mill, inserting acorns instead of pencils and turning them against the blade. He had even devised a way to adjust the blade to the diminishing size of the acorn. "Iris," Fern called to her daughter, who was knitting in the bedroom. As usual, there was no answer. "Iris, come and give me a hand, would you?" she called again as she added the last of the sugar to the acorn flour. Normally her daughter would appear silently at her side and help, but this time there was no sign of her. "Iris. Iris." Fern was getting annoyed. There was a clinking noise coming from the air vent in the ceiling over the bedroom. Before long, Iris appeared at her mother's side in the kitchen and without a word began kneading the flour. She poured a little of the watered-down milk into the acorn flour and deftly kneaded the mix into a dough. Fern looked at her daughter's red-flushed cheeks. Her hair smelt of sunshine, and she was short of breath, as if she'd just run a race. "So our little princess has become an incorrigible tomboy, has she?" she said sarcastically. "Collecting acorns is men's work. If your grandmother Beatrice ever saw her granddaughter climbing out through a hole in the roof." Iris just giggled and carried on kneading the dough, her eyes shining teasingly. Once she had finished kneading the sugar dough, she took some more acorn flour, added a little salt, and poured in more of the milk from the blue glass, then diligently started kneading it into another batch of dough. Iris, you'll give me a nervous breakdown at this rate. Are you planning to bake enough cakes to last us 10 days with that amount of flour? Iris, of course, didn't answer and continued kneading with her little hands, then quickly shaped the dough into small cakes as she had been taught. A loud flapping of wings came from outside the air vent, followed by the sound of Robin slipping quickly through the hole in the roof. "Boy, am I hungry," he said, coming into the kitchen and putting the bag that Iris had knitted down on the floor with a thud. It was full of shiny old acorns from last year's crop. "Sis, we've got some fruit for dessert, too." He opened up another bag and showed them some ripe orange berries wrapped in a leaf. Fortunately, he had managed to avoid squashing them. Poor Fern went running to Balba's work table, her head in her hands. "Balba, whatever has come over our children? They won't do what they're told anymore. Have they lost all respect for their parents? Iris is going outside even though she's a girl, and even when I tell her off she just smiles. And then Robin rides on the back of that pigeon of all things and goes picking berries. It's dreadful. What if he falls off? Or if he gets attacked by another bird?" Balba kept his head down and carried on grinding flour. Fern buried her face in her embroidered apron and burst into tears. "It's because you spoil them that they treat us like idiots." From the kitchen came the sound of pancakes sizzling in the frying pan and the appetizing smell of them cooking. It was Robin's job to light the stove, using a magnifying glass to catch the sunlight. "Fern," said Balba quietly, "those kids are giving things more thought than we are, you know. We're assuming that we'll go on living life as we have done up until now. It may just happen that we have to leave." Fern held her breath and looked at Balba. Then she interrupted him, shouting, "No. I don't want to. Leave here? Whatever next? Forsake this quiet room to go somewhere dangerous? What are you talking about? But what if this house burns down? Or what if this house gets a new owner? What will we do then? If that happens, Lily will save us. And if Lily and the others die, then I will die along with them," she added forlornly. "If the children hear you saying things like that, they'll laugh at you. I myself have been thinking for some time that I've got to do something about our situation. But I just don't know what to do. It never occurred to me to go outside and ride on a pigeon's back to look around. But the children have been taking it upon themselves to find a way to do something." Balba stopped talking and looked at Fern. She had visibly aged over the past 6 months, and her pale golden hair was now streaked with white. Even though they were still living quite peacefully, the strain of making ends meet in the kitchen and coping with the anxiety of not knowing what was going to happen next had taken its toll. Balba gently rubbed her back as she wept and said softly, "The pancakes are ready. How about putting a smile on and coming to have lunch? And afterwards, let's have a good talk with the children." The dining table in the living room was set for 2, with 1 plate of delicious-looking pancakes and another of berries garnished with leaves. "Just for 2. Iris," Robin called Balba uneasily. But there was no reply. Balba, wide-eyed, Fern looked around their home. It was shrouded in silence. Iris and Robin had gone. She stopped crying and shook off Balba's hand. "No, don't. Wait," Balba said hastily, but she ran over to the bedroom to the spot below the air vent in the roof and started climbing frantically up. Fern tried to ignore how much her legs were shaking inside her long skirt as she made her way up, and presently her pale face peeked out beneath the rain canopy. Almost immediately, Balba's round face, bright red with anxiety and nerves, appeared alongside hers. Balba crawled to the edge of the vent and then, just as Robin had done for Iris some time before, took Fern by the hand and helped her up, making sure she was seated safely on the ledge. "Oh my giddy goodness, look over there," he said. Near the top of the big tree, on a dizzyingly high branch, was a gray pigeon. Beside it, hanging in thin air, was a hammock that sparkled in the light. It looked remarkably like Iris's handiwork, and sure enough, in it sat Iris and Robin. Not only that, but they were in the middle of enjoying a picnic together with that gray pigeon. "Balba, I don't see any oak trees around here," said Fern sheepishly after a while. "How can there be any acorns on this roof?" She gazed at an oak tree in the forest around the Hachi Man's shrine some distance off. Robin and Iris, meanwhile, had noticed their parents sitting there on the ledge. Iris, they finally came out. I never thought Mother would have it in her to come out onto the roof, said Iris, impressed. Arlo, too, saw the two elderly little people. So, today's evacuation drill has been a big success, hasn't it? Now, even if there is an air raid, your parents will be able to escape, said Arlo, giving them full marks. It's all thanks to you, Arlo. Yes, it's really all you're doing. Iris and Robin fervently thanked their big friend. After a while, and with much effort, Balba and Fern climbed back down from the roof. Going back down through the hole was a lot harder than it had been climbing up. They sat down to the dinner table and ate the sweet pancakes and fresh berries in silence. The children win, don't they, Balba? Said Fern with a sigh. They've been supporting us all this time with those acorns, and we knew nothing. That's enough about acorns, Balba said shortly. Even I realized long ago that acorns aren't from Zelkova trees. He sat back down before his milling machine and resumed grinding the acorns into flour to supplement their meals. Just the day before, Joy had been summoned to a Parents' Association meeting at Lily's school to hear the head teacher talk about the upcoming mass evacuations. News of the Japanese army's crushing defeat in Saigon that July had cast a dark shadow over their lives, and now they were finalizing the plans to move all school children in groups to the countryside. Their parents had been aware of the possibility of this happening, but it still came as a shock to hear that the time had actually come to carry it out. In homes all over the city that day, family meetings were convened and parents were deciding that, for the sake of the country, they would let their children go. Nevertheless, all those who had relations or acquaintances in the countryside resolved to send their children to them rather than as part of the group evacuation. In the Greenwood household, too, a family meeting was held in the absence of Drake and Finn. If the grandparents in Nigeri had still been alive, then Joy would have had no hesitation in sending Lily to them. However, they had both passed away the previous year, and now only distant relations, two women, were living in the house. Lily had been allocated a place in a group evacuating to Yamanashi Prefecture, but given her poor state of health, Joy fretted over sending her to such a cold area. The group evacuation is just the thing for spoilt kids like you, Lily, spat Shin. All the other children are in high spirits looking forward to the evacuation, just like soldiers, but oh no, not you. You're such a selfish little brat. Shin had become even more patriotic since starting middle school, but Lily fully understood what he was saying. Her classmates, Michiko, Yasuyo, and Akiko, had been talking excitedly about how they would be able to eat white rice when they evacuated to Yamagata. She even had friends who seriously worried about not being allowed to join the evacuation if they failed the physical examination. But Lily, being Lily, had only one thought on her mind. I am not going to join the group evacuation, she declared. I don't mind going on my own to Nigeri, but I'm not going with the group. I won't be able to take the little people with me. Shin glared at her. What kind of a reason is that? You can get Mum to look after them. No. She's already too busy looking after Daddy. And anyway, I took on the responsibility of looking after them, Lily said, unusually decisively. Shin was getting irritated. He had been feeling increasingly angry with his little sister for placing so much importance on these English-born little people. Since the beginning of last year, there had even been a ban on singing American and British songs. England was their enemy, but here was Lily refusing to join the mass evacuation for the sake of those little people. He was dying to give her a good slap. Shin, won't you evacuate together with Lily? Joy asked. You could transfer to a middle school in Nigeri, no way. Shin said angrily. Do you really expect me to go to some school out in the sticks? I'd never get into military prep next year if I did that. Lots of pupils from my school get accepted into the Naval Academy or the Army because we study so hard. We get let off working in the factories because of it. Because studying for our country is more important. Lily should join the group evacuation. If she doesn't go, she's a traitor. As he spoke, Shin became more and more worked up until at last he grabbed Lily's shoulders and shook her hard. Behave yourself, said Joy. Picking on a small child, whatever next. A bitter smile played across her lips as she contemplated this son of hers attacking his little sister on behalf of the great Japanese Empire. But this just inflamed Shin. "Shut up, Mum. You're so stupid." He let go of Lily's shoulders and raced upstairs. "Mummy, quick. Don't let him." Lily clung onto the back of Shin's shirt as he reached the heavy door of the little book room. On top of the bookcase, Bulba and Fern pricked up their ears at the sound of running footsteps along the corridor. The door creaked open and in poked Shin's face, twisted with hate. Behind him they could hear Lily screaming. "Bulba! Fern! Hide quickly!" Iris and Robin were still outside on the roof. "Fern, quick, there's not a moment to lose," Bulba said, grabbing her hand and pulling her towards the air vent. Last time Fern had been so frantic that she'd hardly noticed the fan in front of it, but now it seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. Nevertheless, she managed to crawl through its blades and reached the top of the vent. Bulba pushed her up from behind, then pulled himself up. By the time Shin climbed up to the top of the bookcase and looked around the little people's house, they had all gone. Shin saw the fridge that he himself had made for them in the corner of the kitchen, still kept scrupulously clean, although it would have been impossible to get hold of ice now. In front of Bulba's workbench, an old pencil sharpener lay on its side. 5 acorns were piled up next to it. The little people's home was flooded with the cozy light from the familiar blue glass goblet. Seeing this, Shin's energy suddenly drained away, and he slowly climbed back down off the shelf. Below, Lily was crying, not silently as usual, but wailing and sobbing hysterically. "Where are your little people when you need them, Lily?" Shin said as he left the little book room. Lily didn't know that Bulba and the others had gone outside through the air vent, but she was relieved that they'd at least managed to keep out of sight from Shin. As she chased after Shin into this room, Lily had realized that she loved the little people more than anything else. She knew now that she wasn't simply fulfilling her role as a Greenwood child. She really, truly wanted to care for them. "Bulba, Fern. It's okay now. Iris, Robin, you can come out again now," she called to let them know it was safe again, resolving to herself that she would look after and protect the little people come what may.